My name is Julia. I am 32 years old. Right now, I am sitting in a disciplinary hearing room, facing a panel of 5 people who will decide whether I can continue practicing law. On the other side of this room sit my own parents, my older brother, and my younger sister. They are not here to support me. They are the ones who filed the complaint against me. They claim I practice law illegally. They claim I am a fraud. The people who raised me are trying to destroy everything I have worked for. How did we get here? Before I continue, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you have ever felt betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because this story is one you will want to hear until the very end. To understand why my own family is sitting across from me as accusers, I need to take you back 10 years. 10. I grew up in a small town just outside Columbus, Ohio. Our house was modest, a 2-story home with chipped paint and a yard that my father never quite finished landscaping. My father worked as a freelance plumber. He took jobs when they came and spent the rest of his time watching television or complaining about how the world had treated him unfairly. My mother worked part-time at a local dry cleaning shop. She was always tired, always sighing, always reminding us that life was hard, and we should not expect too much from it. I have 2 siblings. My older brother Derek is 4 years older than me. He dropped out of high school in his junior year because he said school was pointless. He went straight into construction work, which he complained about constantly, but never tried to leave. My younger sister Samantha is 3 years younger than me. She was the baby of the family, the one who got away with everything. She spent her teenage years focused on parties and boyfriends and never showed much interest in anything else. From a very young age, I was different. I loved reading. I loved learning. While Derek was outside getting into trouble and Samantha was locked in her room talking on the phone, I was at the library checking out books about history and science and law. I would read for hours, losing myself in worlds far away from our cramped little house. My parents did not understand me. They did not try to understand me. My father would see me reading and shake his head. He would say things like, "Books will not pay the bills, Julia. You need to learn real skills." My mother would add, "Do not think you are better than us just because you read fancy words." I never thought I was better than them. I just wanted something different. I wanted more. When I was 16 years old, something happened that changed the course of my life forever. My grandmother, my mother's mother, her name was Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor was the kindest woman I ever knew. She had soft white hair and warm hands, and she always smelled like lavender. She was the only person in my family who encouraged my dreams. When I told her I wanted to go to college, she held my hands and said, "You can do anything you set your mind to, Julia. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Grandma Eleanor got sick that year. She needed surgery, a major operation that could save her life. But the insurance company denied her claim. They said she had misrepresented something on her application from years ago. It was a technicality, a cruel bureaucratic excuse to avoid paying for her care. My family did not have the money for the surgery without insurance. And we did not have the money to hire a lawyer to fight the insurance company. I watched my grandmother suffer for 2 years. I watched her grow weaker and weaker, while my parents made phone calls that went nowhere and filled out paperwork that was ignored. I watched her die in a hospital bed holding my hand because a corporation decided her life was not worth the cost. That was when I made my decision. I would become a lawyer. I would learn the system. I would make sure that what happened to Grandma Eleanor would never happen to anyone I loved ever again. I threw myself into my studies. I graduated high school with honors. I earned a full scholarship to Ohio State University. And from there, I was accepted into their law school. For 7 years, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I took extra classes. I interned at legal aid clinics. I studied until my eyes burned and my back ached from hunching over textbooks. During all those years, my family offered no support. Not once did they call to ask how I was doing. Not once did they send a card for my birthday or offer to help with expenses. When I would call home, the conversations were short and dismissive. My mother would say things like, "Still studying. When are you going to get a real job?" My father would grunt and pass the phone to someone else. Derek stopped taking my calls altogether. Samantha would answer sometimes, but only to talk about herself before making an excuse to hang up. When I graduated from law school, I sent them an invitation to the ceremony. I included a personal note telling them how much it would mean to me if they could be there. I waited for a response. None came. I called the house the week before graduation. My mother answered and said, "We cannot make it. We have things to do." I walked across that stage alone. I received my degree alone. I took photos with my friends and their families smiling, even though my heart was breaking. That night, I called home one more time. My mother answered. I told her I had graduated. She said, "Congratulations," in a flat voice, then added, "I have to go. Dinner is ready." She hung up before I could respond. I cried that night. I cried for the family I wished I had. I cried for Grandma Eleanor, who would have been so proud. But I also made a promise to myself. I would not let their indifference stop me. I would build my own life, my own success, my own happiness. I started working at a small law firm that specialized in family law and estate planning. I was good at my job. I cared about my clients. I worked long hours and took on difficult cases, and slowly built a reputation as a dedicated and competent attorney. After 3 years, I was promoted to lead attorney. My salary increased. For the first time in my life, I had financial stability. And that was when things began to change with my family. Suddenly, my phone started ringing more often. My mother would call to chat, asking about my life, my work, my apartment. Derek sent a text saying he was proud of me. Samantha wanted to reconnect to have sister lunches and shopping trips. At first, I was cautious. But part of me, that little girl who just wanted her family to love her, that part of me was hopeful. Maybe they had changed. Maybe success had finally made them see me differently. Maybe we could finally be a real family. I started sending money home. When my mother needed help with medical bills, I paid them. When Derek's car broke down, I covered the repairs. When Samantha needed a deposit for an apartment, I provided it. I told myself this was what family did. They helped each other. And I had the means to help, so I did. For a while, things seemed better. They called more often. They invited me to family dinners. They asked about my cases and seemed interested in my answers. I thought maybe finally I was being accepted. But I did not see what was really happening. I did not understand that their sudden interest had nothing to do with love. It had everything to do with what I could give them. And what they really wanted was something much bigger than car repairs and apartment deposits. What they wanted would put my entire career at risk. What they wanted would set into motion the events that led me to this disciplinary hearing. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way their questions slowly shifted from my life to my work. The way they started asking about legal procedures, about documents, about what a lawyer could and could not do. At the time, I thought they were just curious. I thought they were finally taking an interest in my career. I was wrong. I was so very wrong. To understand what happened next, I need to tell you about my great Aunt Margaret. Aunt Margaret was my grandmother Eleanor's younger sister. She was 83 years old, a widow, who had lost her husband 20 years earlier. They never had children, so Aunt Margaret lived alone in a large farmhouse in rural Ohio, surrounded by nearly 50 acres of land. That land had been in the family for generations. It was beautiful property, rolling hills, and old oak trees and a pond where I used to catch frogs when I was a little girl visiting during summers. Aunt Margaret and I had always been close. She was like a second grandmother to me, especially after Grandma Eleanor passed away. She had the same kind eyes, the same gentle voice, the same belief in my dreams. When I graduated from law school, she was the one family member who sent a card. Inside, she had written, "Your grandmother would be so proud. I know I am." Aunt Margaret's property was valuable, very valuable. Recent development in the surrounding areas had driven up land prices. Conservative estimates placed the value of her land at around $1.2 million. For a family like mine, that amount of money was almost unimaginable. When Aunt Margaret started showing mild signs of memory issues, nothing serious, just the normal forgetfulness that comes with age, my family suddenly became very interested in her well-being. My mother started visiting Aunt Margaret every week. She would bring casseroles and homemade bread and spend hours sitting with her. Derek offered to fix things around the farmhouse for free. He replaced a broken fence, repaired some roof shingles, painted the barn. Samantha called regularly, chatting about nothing in particular, but making sure to stay connected. At first, I thought this was wonderful. I thought my family had finally developed a sense of compassion and connection. I was touched by their efforts. I even praised them for it. I said things like, "It is so nice that you are spending time with Aunt Margaret. She must really appreciate the company." But then the questions started. It began subtly. My mother would call me and casually ask about power of attorney documents. She wanted to know how they worked, who could sign them, what rights they granted. I explained, thinking she was just curious or perhaps planning for her own future. Then Derek asked about property transfers. He wanted to know if land could be signed over from one person to another, how long the process took, whether the original owner needed to be present. I explained again, still not seeing the pattern. Samantha was more direct. She called one evening and asked, "If someone is getting old and might not make good decisions anymore, how do you make sure their assets go to the right people?" That question gave me pause. I asked what she meant by right people. She laughed it off and changed the subject. But a seed of suspicion had been planted in my mind. The turning point came during a family dinner. It was a Sunday evening at my parents' house. My mother had made pot roast. My father was unusually talkative, and the atmosphere seemed almost normal, almost happy. But then between the main course and dessert, my father cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "Julia," he said, "we need to talk about Aunt Margaret." I set down my fork. "What about her, Cherry? She is getting old," he continued. "Her mind is not what it used to be. We need to make sure her affairs are in order before it is too late." "What do you mean by too late?" I asked. My mother jumped in. "If we do not act soon, the government will take everything when she dies. All that land, all that money, it will go to taxes and lawyers. We need to protect it, keep it in the family." I explained that this was not accurate. I told them that Aunt Margaret could create a will that would distribute her assets according to her wishes. I explained the basics of estate planning and how inheritance worked, but they were not interested in my explanation. Derek leaned forward. "You are a lawyer. You can help us." "Help you how?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "Aunt Margaret trusts you," he said. "She listens to you. You could talk to her, convince her to sign over the property now while she still can. Transfer it to the family before anything happens." I felt my stomach drop. "You want me to convince an elderly woman to give away her property?" "Not give away," my mother corrected quickly. "Transfer. To family. It is what she would want anyway. We are just making sure it happens the right way." I looked around the table. My father was nodding. Derek had that aggressive look in his eyes, the one he got when he wanted something and expected to get it. Samantha was examining her nails, already assuming this was a done deal. "No," I said firmly. The word hung in the air. My mother blinked. Derek's jaw tightened. My father's nodding stopped abruptly. "What do you mean, no?" Derek demanded. "I mean, I will not do that," I said. "What you are describing is unethical at best and potentially illegal at worst. If Aunt Margaret does not have full mental capacity, any document she signs could be challenged as invalid. And if she does have capacity, then she has the right to make her own decisions about her property without being pressured by family members." "Pressured?" My mother's voice rose. "We are not pressuring anyone. We are protecting her. We are protecting the family." "You are trying to take advantage of an old woman," I said quietly. The table exploded. My father slammed his hand down, rattling the dishes. Derek stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. My mother started crying, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. Samantha finally looked up from her nails, her expression cold and calculating. "After everything we have done for you," my mother sobbed. "After all those years of raising you, feeding you, keeping a roof over your head, this is how you repay us." "You did not raise me to help you defraud elderly relatives," I shot back. "And I will not start now." I left that dinner without eating dessert. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me could not believe what had just happened. Another part of me, a cynical, wounded part, was not surprised at all. They had never changed. They had never loved me for who I was. They only saw me as a tool to be used when it suited their purposes. That night, I made a decision. I needed to check on Aunt Margaret myself. I needed to make sure she was safe from my family's schemes. The following Saturday, I drove out to Aunt Margaret's farmhouse. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind that makes you remember why you love Ohio, despite its harsh winters. The trees were blooming, the fields were green, and the old farmhouse looked peaceful in the afternoon sun. Aunt Margaret met me at the door with a warm hug and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. She looked good, a little thinner than the last time I had seen her, a little slower in her movements, but her eyes were clear and her smile was genuine. We sat in her kitchen drinking tea and catching up on each other's lives. She asked about my work, my apartment, whether I was seeing anyone special. I asked about her health, her garden, how she was managing alone. The conversation flowed easily the way it always did between us. But I had come with a purpose. Eventually, I brought up the subject of my family's visits. "Aunt Margaret," I said carefully, "I heard that Mom and Derek have been coming to see you a lot lately. How has that been?" Her smile flickered slightly. "Oh, yes, they have been very attentive, very interested in helping." "Helping with what?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up slowly and walked to a drawer in her kitchen counter. She pulled out a folder and brought it back to the table. "They brought me these," she said, setting the folder down. "Papers for me to sign." I opened the folder. Inside was a stack of legal documents. My blood went cold as I read them. The top document was a deed transfer prepared to move ownership of all 50 acres directly to my parents' names, effective immediately. Below that was a power of attorney form, granting my mother full control over Aunt Margaret's financial and legal affairs. There were other documents too, releases and waivers that would essentially strip Aunt Margaret of all control over her own property and assets. But what made me feel physically ill was the name printed at the bottom of each document as the preparing attorney. Julia Ann Morrison, my name, my credentials, my bar number. I had never seen these documents before in my life. I had not prepared them. I had not signed them. Someone had forged my information to make it appear that I, a licensed attorney, had created these papers. "Aunt Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "did you sign any of these?" She shook her head. "Not yet." I told them I wanted to think about it. I did not understand everything they were asking me to do, and something felt wrong about it. "Something is very wrong about it," I confirmed. I held up the documents. "I did not make these papers. Someone used my name without my permission. This is forgery." Aunt Margaret's face paled. "Forgery. But they said you prepared everything. They said you were helping them take care of me." I reached across the table and took her hands. "I would never do anything to hurt you, and I would never help anyone take what is rightfully yours. These documents are fake, and what they are trying to do is called elder fraud." We sat together for a long time that afternoon. I explained everything to Aunt Margaret, being as gentle as I could while still being honest. I told her that my family wanted her property, and that they had created fake legal documents to try to trick her into signing it over. I told her that using my name as the attorney was likely an attempt to gain her trust, since she knew me and believed in me. Aunt Margaret was shaken, but also angry. She had always been a strong woman, and discovering that people she had welcomed into her home were trying to deceive her awakened that strength. "What should I do?" she asked me. "First, we need to make sure you have proper legal protection," I said. "I am going to help you create a real will with a legitimate attorney who has no connection to me or my family. Everything will be witnessed and notarized properly. And I think we need to limit my family's access to you." Over the next few weeks, I helped Aunt Margaret put her affairs in order. I connected her with a colleague of mine, an estate planning attorney named Patricia Coleman, who specialized in elder law. Patricia reviewed everything met with Aunt Margaret multiple times and helped her create a proper will. The will Aunt Margaret chose to create reflected her true wishes. She left the majority of her estate to local charities, including a food bank and an animal shelter she had supported for years. She also established a scholarship fund in my grandmother Eleanor's name to help students from low-income families attend college. She left small bequests to a few cousins and distant relatives who had always treated her kindly. She left nothing to my parents, nothing to Derek, nothing to Samantha, and she specifically stated that this was an intentional choice based on their behavior. She also did not leave anything to me. I had insisted on this. I did not want anyone to be able to claim that I had influenced her for my own gain. I wanted everything to be above reproach. When the will was finalized and properly filed, I thought perhaps that would be the end of it. I thought my family would realize their scheme had failed and move on to something else. I was wrong. Their response was swift and vicious. The confrontation happened 2 weeks after Aunt Margaret's will was filed. My mother called and demanded a family meeting. Her voice on the phone was sharp accusatory. She said we needed to discuss what I had done. I agreed to come partly because I wanted to face this directly, and partly because I was still holding on to some naive hope that we could resolve things peacefully. The atmosphere in my parents' living room was hostile from the moment I walked in. My father sat in his usual chair, arms crossed, face red. My mother paced near the window, wringing her hands. Derek stood against the wall, flexing his jaw. Samantha was on the couch, her phone in her hand, recording everything. "You ruined everything," Derek said before I even sat down. "What exactly did I ruin?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "You know what you did," my mother snapped. "You turned Aunt Margaret against us. You poisoned her mind, and now she is giving everything to strangers instead of her own family." "Aunt Margaret made her own decisions," I said. "I just made sure she had accurate legal representation to do so." "You had no right," my father growled. It was the most emotion I had heard from him in years. "That land should have stayed in the family. It was supposed to be our inheritance." "It was never your inheritance," I pointed out. "It belonged to Aunt Margaret. She earned it. She maintained it. She had every right to decide what happens to it." "But not like this," my mother wailed. "Charity scholarships. She is giving away $1 million to strangers while her own blood gets nothing." I took a deep breath. "I need to address something else. The documents you showed Aunt Margaret, the ones with my name on them. I did not create those. Someone forged my credentials to make fake legal documents. That is a crime." The room went quiet. I watched their faces. Not one of them looked surprised. Not one of them denied it. "We had to do something." My mother finally set her voice defensive. "You were not going to help us, so we found another way." "Who created those documents?" I demanded. Silence. Derek finally shrugged. "A guy I know. He does paperwork sometimes. We figured if Aunt Margaret saw your name on it, she would trust it more." "Do you understand what you did?" I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You committed forgery. You committed fraud. You impersonated an attorney. These are felonies. You could go to prison." "We would not have had to do anything if you had just helped us in the first place," Samantha said, finally looking up from her phone. "This is your fault." I stared at them. These people who shared my blood but nothing else. I saw no remorse in their eyes, no guilt. No, just anger and resentment directed at me for preventing them from stealing from an elderly woman. I am not going to pretend this conversation never happened, I said slowly. What you did was wrong, and I will not be a part of it. If you say anything to anyone, Derek said, pushing off from the wall, you will regret it. I stood up and walked toward the door. My hand was on the knob when my mother's voice stopped me. Think carefully about what you do next, Julia. We are still your family, and families protect each other. If you turn on us, we will turn on you, and you have a lot more to lose than we do. I left without responding. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. They had threatened me. My own family had threatened to retaliate if I exposed their crimes. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had led to this moment, wondering what I should do next. Wondering what they would do next. I did not have to wonder for long. The letter arrived 8 weeks later. I had just come home from a long day at work. I was tired, looking forward to a quiet evening with a book and a glass of wine. My mail was waiting in the box as usual. Bills, advertisements, a postcard from a friend traveling abroad, and a thick envelope with the return address of the Ohio Supreme Court Office of Disciplinary Counsel. My hands were steady as I opened it. I had received professional correspondence before, and there was no reason to expect anything alarming. But as I read the first paragraph, the blood drained from my face. This letter constitutes formal notice that a complaint has been filed against you, alleging violations of the Ohio Rules of Professional Conduct. The allegations include practicing law without a valid license, forgery of legal documents, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. The complaint went on to detail the accusations. According to the document, I had allegedly provided legal services during a period when my bar license was not in good standing. I had allegedly created fraudulent documents designed to transfer property from an elderly person to myself. I had allegedly used my position to manipulate and exploit a vulnerable adult for financial gain. The complainants were listed at the bottom of the page: Harold Morrison, Margaret Morrison, Derek Morrison, Samantha Morrison, my parents, my brother, my sister. They had reported me to the disciplinary board. They had taken their forged documents, their lies, their twisted version of events, and they had weaponized them against me. I sat down heavily on my couch, the letter trembling in my hands. They were trying to take my law license. They were trying to destroy the career I had spent a decade building. They were trying to ruin my life because I had refused to help them commit a crime. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and action. At work, word of the investigation spread quickly. The law firm I had given 3 years of my life to suddenly became a cold and unwelcoming place. My supervising partner called me into his office and explained with barely concealed discomfort that they were placing me on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. It was for the good of the firm, he said, to protect our reputation. I packed up my desk that afternoon. I carried my belongings out through a lobby full of colleagues who would not meet my eyes. By evening, I was sitting alone in my apartment, unemployed, and facing a disciplinary hearing that could end my career permanently. Clients who had trusted me began calling to say they were seeking representation elsewhere. Some were apologetic, some were cold, some simply did not return my calls at all. In a matter of days, everything I had built seemed to be crumbling around me. The social impact was almost as devastating as the professional one. In our small legal community, rumors spread fast. I heard through remaining friends that people were talking about me, speculating about what I had done, assuming the worst, because why else would a complaint have been filed? No one bothered to ask for my side of the story. They simply believed the accusation because it was easier than questioning it. I stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time. I lost weight because eating felt impossible when my stomach was constantly churning with stress. There were moments, dark moments, when I wondered if any of this was worth fighting for. Maybe I should just walk away from Ohio, from law, from everything. But then I would think about Grandma Eleanor. I would think about why I became a lawyer in the first place. I would think about all the clients I had helped, all the families I had protected, all the good I had done in my career. And I would find the strength to keep going. I began preparing for the hearing. I gathered every document I could think of that might be relevant. I made copies of my law license, my bar registration, my continuing education certificates, all proving that I was and had always been a licensed attorney in good standing. I obtained certified copies of the forged documents from Aunt Margaret, ready to demonstrate that the signatures and credentials were falsified. I compiled text messages and emails from my family, showing their requests for my help in their scheme and my refusals. I contacted Patricia Coleman, the attorney, who had helped Aunt Margaret with her real will. She agreed to provide a sworn statement, confirming that all legitimate legal work related to Aunt Margaret's estate had been conducted by her, not me, and that everything had been done properly. Most importantly, I visited Aunt Margaret one more time. I explained what was happening, how my family was trying to use the disciplinary system to punish me for protecting her. She was outraged on my behalf. Without me even asking, she insisted on writing her own statement describing exactly what had happened, how my family had tried to deceive her, and how I had been the one to protect her from their scheme. Night after night, I sat at my kitchen table organizing evidence and rehearsing what I would say. I wrote and rewrote my statement, making sure every word was precise and every fact was supported. I knew that my entire future depended on this hearing. I could not afford to leave anything to chance. The night before the hearing, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Julia. Her voice was cold but controlled. Tomorrow does not have to happen. What do you mean? I asked. Drop this. Admit you made mistakes. Apologize to the family. We can tell the board that we misunderstood, that we overreacted. Everything can go back to normal. Normal? I almost laughed. You filed false accusations against me. You are trying to take away my license based on lies. There is no normal to go back to. We are your family, she said, and for a moment I heard something that might have been genuine emotion in her voice. Family should stick together. You should have thought about that before you tried to destroy my life, I replied. I did not start this fight, but I will finish it. If you go through with this hearing, she said, her voice turning hard again, you will regret it. We will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Your name will be mud in this town. No one will ever trust you again. Then I guess I will have to live with that, I said. Good night, Mother. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. Outside my window, the city lights flickered against the dark sky. Tomorrow would determine everything. Tomorrow I would face my family in front of strangers and tell my truth. I was terrified, but I was also ready. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Ohio weather that seeps into your bones. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back neatly, my makeup, minimal but professional. I wanted to look competent and composed. I wanted them to see a lawyer, not a victim. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. It was not a courtroom, but a conference room in a state office building with a long table at one end for the disciplinary panel and rows of chairs facing it. The walls were beige, the lighting fluorescent, the atmosphere clinical. The panel consisted of 5 people, 3 attorneys, and 2 public members seated behind the long table. In the center was the presiding officer, Judge Harold Patterson. I had researched him thoroughly. He was a retired appellate court judge with a reputation for being thorough and fair. He had silver hair, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a face that revealed nothing of what he was thinking. I arrived early and took a seat in the front row. My folder of documents sat on my lap, organized with colored tabs for quick reference. I had practiced this moment so many times that it almost felt rehearsed, except for the trembling in my hands that I could not quite control. When my family arrived, they made an entrance. My mother wore a black dress that made her look like she was attending a funeral. My father shuffled in behind her, uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit. Derek walked with aggressive confidence, like he was ready for a fight. Samantha brought up the rear, her face set in an expression of martyred innocence. They had hired a lawyer. He was a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself to the panel with practiced charm. His name was Vincent Calloway, and he specialized in professional misconduct cases. They had spent money they probably did not have to hire the best they could find. I had no lawyer. I was representing myself because I could not afford to hire anyone, and because I believed in my own innocence strongly enough to argue for it myself. Looking at Calloway's confident smile, I wondered if that had been a mistake. The hearing began with Calloway presenting the case against me. He was good, I had to admit. He painted a picture of me as a cold and calculating attorney who had used my legal knowledge to manipulate a vulnerable elderly relative. He described how I had allegedly forged documents, falsified credentials, and attempted to redirect family inheritance for my own benefit. He called my parents as witnesses. My mother took the stand first. She cried, actual tears rolling down her cheeks as she described how I had always been different from the rest of the family, how I had gone away to college and law school and come back thinking I was better than everyone else, how I had isolated Aunt Margaret from the rest of the family and turned her against them, how they had discovered the forged documents with my name on them and realized with horror that I had been deceiving everyone. My father spoke next, his voice gruff and halting. He said he never understood me, that I had always been secretive and manipulative. He said the family had tried to include me to love me, but I had rejected them again and again. He said finding out about the forged documents had broken his heart. Derek was more aggressive. He claimed he had personally witnessed me pressuring Aunt Margaret to sign papers. He gave specific dates and times describing conversations that never happened in places I had never been. Samantha played the wounded sister perfectly. She talked about how she had looked up to me when we were children, how my betrayal had shattered her faith in family. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and spoke in a quavering voice about the trauma of discovering my supposed crimes. Calloway presented the forged documents as evidence, pointing to my name and bar number at the bottom. He argued that this proved my involvement, that no one else would have had access to this information, that the forgery theory was simply a desperate excuse from someone caught in wrongdoing. Throughout all of this, I sat silently taking notes, keeping my face neutral. I could feel Judge Patterson's eyes on me occasionally, and I wondered what he was thinking. I wondered if he believed any of this. I wondered if I had already lost. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood and approached the small podium that had been set up for the parties. My hands were steadier now. The fear had transformed into something else, something more focused. This was my moment. This was my chance to tell the truth. Distinguished members of the panel, I began my voice clear and strong. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address these allegations. What you have heard today is a carefully constructed lie designed to punish me for refusing to participate in a crime. I started with the facts. I presented my bar license and registration records showing that I had been continuously licensed in good standing for the past 5 years. I presented my continuing education certificates showing that I had fulfilled all requirements. The allegation that I had practiced without a valid license was simply and provably false. Next, I addressed the forged documents. I showed the panel the papers that had been given to Aunt Margaret, pointing out my name and credentials at the bottom. Then I presented exemplars of my actual signature from verified legal filings. Even a casual observer could see that they did not match. The signatures are different, I explained, because I did not sign these documents. I did not draft them. I never saw them until my great-aunt showed them to me herself, confused about why her family was asking her to sign away her property. I presented the text messages and emails from my family, reading key excerpts aloud, messages from my mother asking about power of attorney procedures, Messages from Derek demanding to know how property transfers worked. Messages from Samantha asking how to get control of an elderly person's assets. And most damning of all, messages threatening me with consequences if I did not help them, followed by messages threatening retaliation when I refused. My family did not report me because they discovered wrongdoing, I said. They reported me because I prevented wrongdoing. They reported me as revenge for protecting an elderly woman from their scheme. I presented Patricia Coleman's sworn statement, confirming that she had been the attorney of record for Aunt Margaret's legitimate will, that I had specifically recused myself from any legal work related to the estate, and that all proper procedures had been followed. Finally, I presented Aunt Margaret's own statement. I read it aloud slowly and clearly, letting her words fill the room. She described how my family had visited her with papers to sign, how they had pressured her and confused her, how they had claimed I had prepared everything. She described how I had come to her, explained what was happening, and helped her find independent legal counsel. She stated clearly that I had never asked for anything in return, that I had deliberately excluded myself from her will to avoid any appearance of impropriety, and that I was the only member of my family who had treated her with honesty and respect. When I finished reading, the room was silent. I looked at the panel. Judge Patterson was studying me with those sharp eyes, his expression unreadable. The other panel members were reviewing the documents I had submitted. I took a breath and made my final statement. I became a lawyer because I watched my grandmother die while a corporation exploited legal technicalities to deny her medical care. I swore that I would use my education and my skills to protect people, especially vulnerable people, from those who would take advantage of them. When my own family tried to become those predators, when they targeted an elderly woman who had shown them nothing but kindness, I could not stand by and let it happen. Even though saying no meant losing them, even though protecting Aunt Margaret meant being punished for it, I did what I believe any ethical attorney would do. I told the truth. I protected the vulnerable, and I refused to participate in fraud. I looked directly at Judge Patterson. I am not asking for sympathy. I am simply presenting the facts and trusting this panel to evaluate them fairly. I have spent my entire career trying to live up to the ethical standards of this profession. I am not perfect, but I am honest. And I believe that the evidence shows clearly that these allegations are false, malicious, and motivated by revenge rather than justice. I returned to my seat. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I had said everything I needed to say. Now it was up to the panel to decide. Judge Patterson took several minutes to review the materials I had submitted. He asked clarifying questions of both sides. He asked Calloway to explain the signature discrepancies on the forged documents. Calloway stumbled, trying to suggest that I might have multiple signatures, but even he did not sound convinced. The judge asked my brother Derek to confirm the dates he had provided for his alleged eyewitness testimony. Derek repeated the dates confidently. Judge Patterson then asked me to produce my work calendar for those dates. I pulled up the records on my phone, showing that I had been at a legal conference in Cleveland on the first date and in depositions all day on the second. Derek's face reddened, but he said nothing. Finally, Judge Patterson removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he looked up, his gaze swept across the room, taking in my family, their lawyer, and me. I have presided over many disciplinary hearings in my career, he said slowly. I have seen attorneys who genuinely violated their ethical obligations, and I have seen attorneys who were falsely accused. I have learned to recognize the difference. He paused. This case falls clearly into the latter category. He continued, his voice becoming firmer. The evidence presented by the complainants is not merely insufficient. It is contradicted at every turn by documented facts. The signatures on the allegedly forged documents do not match the respondent's verified signature. The dates provided by witnesses are demonstrably false, according to third-party records. The text messages and emails presented by the respondent show a clear pattern of attempted coercion, followed by retaliatory reporting. Judge Patterson looked directly at my family. I am troubled by what I have seen here today. This appears to be a coordinated effort to weaponize the disciplinary process against an attorney who refused to participate in elder fraud. This is not what this system is designed for. This is not justice. This is abuse of process. He turned back to me. Ms. Morrison, based on the evidence presented, I find no basis for any of the allegations against you. The complaint is dismissed in its entirety. Your license remains in good standing. He paused, then added, "Furthermore, I am recommending that this matter be referred to the County Prosecutor's Office for investigation of potential criminal conduct by the complainants, including but not limited to forgery, fraud, perjury, and filing false reports." The room erupted. My mother screamed something unintelligible. Derek slammed his hand on the table, knocking over a water glass. Samantha burst into tears. Whether genuine or performative, I could not tell. Calloway tried to speak to object to salvage something, but Judge Patterson silenced him with a raised hand. "This hearing is concluded," the judge said firmly. "Officers, please escort the complainants from the building." I sat in my chair, not moving, barely breathing. It was over. I had won. The truth had been heard. As my family was let out, my mother turned and looked at me one last time. Her face was twisted with rage, with hatred, with something that went beyond mere anger. She did not say anything. She did not need to. That look said everything. But for the first time in months, her hatred did not hurt me, because I knew who I was. I knew what I had done, and I knew that the truth had set me free. In the weeks following the hearing, the consequences of my family's actions caught up with them. The county prosecutor's office opened an investigation just as Judge Patterson had recommended. The evidence was overwhelming. Within 2 months, criminal charges were filed. My father and mother were charged with filing false reports and perjury. They pleaded no contest and were sentenced to 2 years of probation community service and fines totaling $15,000. They also faced civil liability for defamation, though I chose not to pursue that option. I had no desire to take money from them. I just wanted them out of my life. Derek was charged with forgery and fraud for his role in creating the fake documents. His friend, who had actually prepared the paperwork, turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges, confirming that Derek had provided my information and directed the forgery. Derek was sentenced to 6 months of supervised probation community service and was required to pay restitution to Aunt Margaret for emotional distress. Samantha cooperated with prosecutors and received the lightest punishment. She was required to complete community service hours at an elder care facility. Perhaps she would learn something about compassion. Perhaps not. The investigation revealed other details that I had not known. My family had been planning their scheme for over a year before approaching me. They had researched Aunt Margaret's property values, consulted with shady document specialists, and even practiced their story about discovering my supposed wrongdoing. The level of premeditation was disturbing. The news spread through our small community quickly. Suddenly, the people who had whispered about me behind my back were offering apologies and support. Colleagues who had avoided me were reaching out to reconnect. The law firm that had placed me on leave called to offer my position back with a raise and a formal apology. I turned them down. I realized that I did not want to go back to my old life, that life had been built on trying to prove something to people who would never accept me. I wanted something different now, something meaningful. I applied for a position at a nonprofit organization called Elder Justice Alliance, which provided free legal services to senior citizens who could not afford representation. The work paid less than half of what I had earned before. The offices were cramped and the caseload was heavy. But from my first day, I knew I had made the right choice. Every client I helped, every elderly person I protected from exploitation or fraud, felt like a small victory. Not just for them, but for Grandma Eleanor, for Aunt Margaret, for everyone who had ever been treated as disposable by people who should have protected them. Aunt Margaret and I grew closer than ever after the hearing. I visited her every weekend, bringing groceries and stories and simply sitting with her in her quiet farmhouse. She told me about her life, about growing up with my grandmother, about the adventures they had shared as young women. Those conversations felt like a connection to a family history that I had been denied. When Aunt Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, I was holding her hand. Her last words to me were, "Your grandmother would be so proud." I arranged her funeral myself. Very few people attended. My family did not come, of course. But those who did come were people who had genuinely cared about her neighbors and friends and fellow volunteers from her charities. We celebrated her life, her kindness, her stubborn independence, and I scattered her ashes in the pond on her property, next to where she had scattered her husband's ashes 20 years before. Her will was executed exactly as she had specified. The land was sold to a conservation trust that would preserve it as green space forever. The money funded the Eleanor Morrison Memorial Scholarship, which would send dozens of students to college over the coming decades. And a donation to the local food bank was made in Margaret's name, enough to feed hundreds of families. My family received nothing, just as Aunt Margaret had intended. They contested the will, of course. They hired lawyers and filed motions and made accusations. But the will was airtight. Patricia Coleman had done excellent work. The contest was dismissed within months, and my family was ordered to pay legal fees. I heard through distant relatives that they blamed me for everything. They told anyone who would listen that I had turned Aunt Margaret against them, that I had stolen their inheritance, that I was a cold and heartless daughter who had abandoned her family. Some people believed them. Most did not. I did not try to defend myself. I did not try to change their minds. I simply lived my life and let my actions speak for themselves. In the year following the hearing, I built a new family from scratch, not by blood, but by choice. I reconnected with law school friends who had drifted away during my busy career. I formed deep friendships with colleagues at Elder Justice Alliance people who shared my values and understood my mission. I joined a book club, started volunteering at an animal shelter, took up hiking on weekends. I also started dating. Not aggressively, not desperately, just opening myself to the possibility of connection. I met a man named David at a community health fair, where I was providing legal information and he was conducting blood pressure screenings. He was a nurse practitioner, kind and funny, and completely unimpressed by my legal credentials. He liked me for who I was, not what I could do for him. We took things slowly. He understood that I had trust issues, that family was a complicated subject for me, that I needed time to learn how to let people in. He was patient. He was consistent. He showed up when he said he would, and did what he said he would do. After years of dealing with people whose words meant nothing, his reliability felt like a miracle. By the end of that year, we were living together. By the end of the following year, we were engaged. We built our life on a foundation of mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values. It was everything my birth family had never been. I want to be clear about something. Healing was not fast. Healing was not linear. Healing was not a moment of revelation followed by endless happiness. For months after the hearing, I had nightmares. I would wake up in cold sweats dreaming that the panel had ruled against me, that I had lost my license, that I was wandering through a world where no one believed me. I would lie awake in the dark, replaying confrontations with my family, thinking of things I wished I had said, feeling the weight of their rejection pressing down on my chest. I found a therapist, a gentle woman named Dr. Carla Weiss, who specialized in family estrangement. We met weekly for over a year. She helped me understand that the pain I felt was normal, that grieving for a family you never really had was one of the hardest kinds of grief, that choosing to protect yourself was not selfish, but necessary. She taught me techniques for managing anxiety and intrusive thoughts. She helped me recognize the patterns of manipulation that my family had used on me for years. She validated my experiences without letting me wallow in victimhood. She pushed me to take responsibility for my own healing, while acknowledging that the wound had been inflicted by others. Slowly, painfully, I began to mend. I learned that I did not need my family's approval to be worthy. I learned that love should not come with conditions or price tags. I learned that some relationships cannot be saved, and that walking away from toxicity is not failure but wisdom. I learned that I could carry the sadness of what my family had done without letting it define me. The anger took longer to fade than the sadness. For a long time, I was furious at my parents, at my siblings, at the years I had spent trying to earn their acceptance. I was angry at myself for being naive, for hoping they would change, for continuing to give them chances long after they had proven who they were. But eventually, even the anger softened. Not into forgiveness exactly. I do not think I will ever truly forgive what they did, but into something like acceptance. They were who they were. They made their choices. And I made mine. Our paths had diverged permanently, and that was not a tragedy. It was just reality. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I stopped hoping for a reconciliation that neither side wanted. I stopped letting their memory take up space in my heart that could be used for better things. Dr. Weiss called it radical acceptance. I just called it moving on. The lesson I carry from all of this is simple but hard won. You cannot control how other people treat you. You can only control how you respond. You can only choose again and again to live according to your own values, to protect what matters to you, to tell your truth, even when no one wants to hear it. When my family betrayed me, I had a choice. I could have given in, helped them with their scheme, kept the peace at the cost of my integrity. I could have stayed silent after they reported me, let the accusations stand, walked away from my career rather than fight back. I could have let their hatred poison me, turning me bitter and suspicious, and closed off from connection. Instead, I chose truth. I chose courage. I chose to believe that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. And in the end, that choice saved me. Not just my license or my career, but my soul. I still think about my family sometimes. When holidays come around, when I see other families together, when I hold my own children, and wonder what kind of grandmother my mother might have been if things had been different. There is a sadness there that will probably never fully disappear, but it is a clean sadness now. Not the messy, desperate sadness of trying to earn love from people who could not give it. Just a quiet acknowledgement of loss, balanced by gratitude for everything I have gained. If you are watching this, and you have been betrayed by people who should have protected you, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Your pain is valid, and you have the strength to survive this. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The truth has power. Your voice has power. And no one, no matter how close to you, has the right to take that power away. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up against family members who tried to harm you? How did you find the courage to tell your truth? Share your story in the comments below.